Hey guys, hope you're well. As a quick disclaimer, I'm not a therapist, so none of this should be taken as mental health advice. If you're having any sort of mental health issues, I recommend consulting a professional therapist or a counselor. Family systems is a theory in the field of psychology that assumes that an individual's psychology is the product of a comprehensive family dynamic of which they are a part. While this may seem self-evident, family systems pays particular attention to the family as an ecosystem where each family member has a role, for better or for worse. In family systems, any pathology that an individual presents in therapy is always assumed to exist in the context of a family dynamic that supports that pathology. In other words, a therapist who uses family systems thinking will assume a teenager who shows up with pathologies operates in a family with parents that have reciprocal pathologies themselves. In family systems, an individual cannot find healing on their own because what they present is always part of a bigger system. So healing must happen in the context of a more healthy family dynamic or a family system altogether, or trying to address the issues in the individual can be a lost cause. Internal family systems has grown out of this family systems theory and applies the same thinking in individual psychology. The assumption of IFS is that our psyche is the sum of multiple parts. Our insides are an ecosystem, and so when we have an issue, resolving that internal issue is not a matter of simply focusing on what a patient initially presents as a problem, but understanding the greater internal ecosystem of the individual and working to heal any more holistic problems in that ecosystem. IFS studies have shown that an individual is made up of multiple inner parts, which are like little people, little voices that comprehensively make up our whole. The premise of IFS is that thinking of ourselves as a unit blinds us from seeing the complexity of this inner world or ecosystem. Richard Schwartz is the psychologist who has developed IFS over multiple decades of working with hundreds of families and individuals. I have to say that personally his insights and practice have been very beneficial in my own journey. These internal parts essentially take on roles that were typically assigned early on and operate as a means of keeping the individual the safest. If someone grew up in a space that included any sort of emotional or physical abuse or neglect, then these parts and internal ecosystems organized themselves when the brain was most plastic at a young age to make the individual the safest in that specific environment. The reality is none of us grew up in a perfect environment, and so our internal world has often been formed in the presence of these traumas we experience.
Okay, so wanted to give you guys a quick rundown on this. The parts form externally on top of the core self based on those traumas. In other words, the internal ecosystem is a product of the external ecosystem or the family system. So based on our early environment, we have these managers, firefighters, and exiles that form as a result. So these different parts, again, are a consequence of our environment. However, what we're going to see is that the parts operate in a certain way in different people that correlate with cognitive function. So I'm going to bring this up in a second, but it's good to just see what each of these parts are. Your managers are basically protecting the individual's security, their behaviors that keep you safe. The firefighters are the more bitey parts that are very reactive. They're taking a slightly different role. They are kind of managing, but they're doing so in a more typically abrasive, aggressive type way. And then the exiles are the little inner child parts that the managers and firefighters are working to protect. And so as you integrate, you're basically working to give these parts new, more healthy roles, because in any person who is having issues, the theory of IFS is that this ecosystem is out of balance. So you're looking for integration. You're looking to essentially free the exiles so that the managers and firefighters can take on more healthy roles. So I'm going to talk about how this correlates with the functions here, and I think it'll make sense here in just a moment.
So that gives you a brief overview of what IFS is. And with that laid out, the purpose of this video is to integrate the findings of Richard Schwartz and his IFS model with the cognitive functions. I've done a lot of parts work and parts meditation personally, and in the process of doing the work, I discovered that my parts had specific functions that I could name and predict. Those names and operations aligned with my own cognitive functions in an uncanny way and really helped me understand my inner voices and how they were affecting my behavior and relationships. If it's true that our archetype dictates how we present to the world, which is described by our functions and repeatable behaviors, it would make sense that presentation would be a reflection of our inner parts. If you've been objectively typed and know your personality, applying this thinking to any inner work can be extremely beneficial for you and anyone you know. So I'm going to use my parts as an example here. So to start, I'm an audio ISTP, consume, sleep, blast, play, which means my functions are TI, SE, NI, and FE. When I first considered this idea, I wondered if my parts were functions, the internal family systems idea. And I came to discover that my inner parts actually corresponded more with my animals than the functions. So if you don't know objective personality system, there's plenty of videos you can YouTube on the animals, but they're simply the combination of two functions that express themselves in various primal human actions. Since we have 4 functions, there are also 4 potential combinations in primal human actions, which are denoted in objective personality as blast, play, consume, and sleep. 2 are introverted, 2 are extroverted. 2 are energy-oriented, 2 information-oriented. I'm not going to elaborate on them any more than that in this video because it would just take too long, so you can, again, YouTube them if you want more information. So before I start talking about my own parts work process, I would highly recommend you don't just do this off the cuff without reading about internal family systems first. Richard Schwartz' book, No Bad Parts, will walk you through the process of doing these meditations. If you don't know what you're doing, you can cause a lot of unnecessary inner turmoil. Even better, if you can find a therapist local to you who is trained in IFS, they can help a lot. So I would encourage that. With that said, parts work starts by going into a meditative state on your own or being in a safe space with a therapist and starting to reflect on an issue that you're having. Through the process of diving inward, you start breaking into these parts where the stressors are coming from. When you're doing this parts work, you're supposed to feel them in your body as well. To describe where each part is, I'll use the chakras as a reference point. So as I got to know my inner parts doing this parts work, I discovered that my sleep part of me, my TI-NI, resides heavily in my gut, which is the sacral and root chakra. I discovered my play part, SEFE. This energy resides in my chest cavity and in my solar plexus chakra. My consume part, my SETI, resides in my head or my crown chakra. And my blast part, this energy resides between my heart and my head, from my heart to my crown chakra. So as I got to know each part and where it resides in my body, each part literally behaved and acted just like the animals. Further, when they're stressed, I can feel them speaking to me in my body. I've had some experiences where I felt my play part devastated and my heart literally hurt. So let's go through the parts now. My sleep part has a masculine TI with a feminine NI, so it's very direct regarding the patterns it sees. And because it's a savior, it's very confident, and it's a developed part of me. It takes responsibility, sometimes. However, because it has the feminine NI, which is actually a demon, it won't push on the patterns. It'll often push on the logic it sees in them, but struggle to act on the patterns it recognizes. And when it finally does act, it tends to be more abrasive because it's been sitting for a while. This part of me is introverted and is fine being alone or in solitude. My play part has a feminine FE with a masculine SE. It wants the presence of other people and is scared to be alone. It approaches the tribe and will move to be accepted. It's movable. It can be manipulative and tell others what they want to hear to be safe. Further, because it's SE, it's very in the moment. Because this is my most underworked animal, it's also the most childlike part of me. It has a hard time seeing the future, being SE dominant. And so when things go bad, this part of me can be very scared and unable to exit that moment. This part of me is really sensitive, and because of this, it's often at odds with the direct sleep part of me.
So I wanted to add a little bit of color on this play part, and just talk about how our bodies are so intimately connected with our mind and our cognition. Because I am play last, my relationships are much more sensitive ventures for me. We all hurt when we lose close relationships, whether it's a partnership or a close friendship. But it's interesting how those things play out in our bodies. When I was 20 years old, I left my first long-term relationship. I had been with her for 2.5 years. And a few months after that, I started dating another girl who we actually didn't date that long, but we broke up, and then shortly after we broke up, she actually died. And so I had tons of inner just relationship tension, and that manifested itself for me as heart arrhythmias, uh, like lots of hypochondria, but just pressure in my chest and just feeling that tension. So this stuff is real. Interesting to consider that.
My consume part has masculine TI and masculine SE. So this part of me actually doesn't cause a lot of problems because it's satisfying itself. It's made up of savior parts that are masculine, so it takes complete responsibility for itself in being pushy to get what it wants. This part of me wants to experience the world. It wants to be in the moment and take in those new experiences. When I sit stagnant for a long time, this part of me will demand that I do something to get a new experience. My blast part has feminine FE and feminine NI. This part of me wants to communicate with the world, but in a soft and winsome way in most cases. It has plenty of information to provide the world because the double masculine consume is aggressively taking in new information and processing it constantly. Although it's a demon, so it's taken time to develop, but because it's balanced, it doesn't really cause me a lot of problems. That said, demon blast does tend to be a little more reactive. So the downside of having blast as a demon is that it's usually motivated by people who my consume convinces it are wrong. It tends to focus on what is wrong and needs to be fixed instead of just communicating just to communicate. But because it's feminine, it doesn't usually come off as negative or pushy. It's mostly amicable. Now, what's interesting is that being an info-dominant personality, my consume and blast coins are pretty imbalanced. I respect information, and I don't have a problem taking it in and communicating it. Further, I'm a double observer. My main imbalance, therefore, is people and energy. So I wasn't surprised that the parts of me that needed the most work in these internal family systems are my sleep and play parts. Also, my play is my demon, so it gets neglected and is the most underdeveloped. Again, most of my immature reactions are sourced in this part of me, and it's imbalanced with my savior, sleep.
So just as a quick added thought, it makes sense that these two parts would be my managers. Managers tend to be a little bit less abrasive in their protection of the exile as far as IFS is concerned. And that's exactly what my consume and blast are. As an infodom, doing fine with the information. There's a lot of balance there. I use my info dominance to really solve a lot of life problems. That's how I keep from being triggered. I've noticed in types that the single deciders will subject themselves to control and chaos for the sake of avoiding people issues. Likewise, the single observers will subject themselves to people issues to avoid control and chaos. So in the case of the parts, my consume and blast is a relatively calm space for me for the most part. And so I will really hang out here to manage my inner world. The biggest polarities are in the sleep and the play, which is why the sleep ends up being my firefighter. It's strange to think of an internal animal being the abrasive firefighter, but it's more that I recluse and really punch as well on just the direct facts regarding the patterns I'm seeing. And that's the main way that I protect that little sensitive play exile. So it's really interesting to see how my inner world correlates with the imbalance of these animals, and how my parts are really in alignment with that. So I just wanted to add that thought.
So my biggest issues come from the big swings between my decider functions within my sleep and play animals. In an almost self-contradictory way, my savior TI demands that I figure things out alone and be in my own head to the neglect of my underdeveloped play. You have to see these parts as individuals because they literally have their own voices and speak to you and to one another inside you. I've had to work with these two inner parts of me to be more symbiotic, and in doing so, I found a lot more inner peace. I've let them know that I'm 35 years old and don't need them occupying unhealthy spaces at this point, doing patterns that they learned from the past or in my childhood. Most importantly, I'm teaching them and demonstrating to them that we're safe, and I'll protect them and appreciate them. They obviously respond positively to this, and I have a lot less inner noise because they know I'm listening to them and I'm working to understand them. My body also feels calmer when I integrate them because they're not screaming to be heard anymore. I still have a long way to go, but the small steps I've made through understanding their roles have been critical and integrating my inner world. So the reason using the functions as a framework with our parts is helpful is because it gives us insight into the voids we're leaving and gives us practical direction as to what we need to work on in the inner world. Once you start to understand these parts, making sense of yourself and your interactions with others becomes very interesting. You start to see yourself repeating the same patterns in the same situations and it coming from these parts. If you're interacting with someone else who has been objectively typed, the insights derived from this knowledge is also uncanny. Understanding the parts of your partner and the people closest to you can be revolutionary in making sense of their reactions to you in certain situations and really bring a lot of clarity to the relationship dynamic overall. In the same way that you can't change your functions, you also can't change your parts. They're the cognitive cards that you've been dealt. However, you can become conscious of these inner polarities and how they influence your interactions with the world. You can work with them to interact more optimally together. And as you integrate your internal family system, you can find more balance and peace in your inner life by taking responsibility for the voids. This peace then translates to relationships that are better as well. And those that learn to kindly administer and lead their inner parts develop skills that help interacting with the parts of other individuals as well. So the compassion translates. So I wanted to add some quick closing thoughts here on the parts work. The reason integrating parts theory with the animals is because it gives us clearer categories for what we need to focus on. So for me as a play last, I know that my void is not engaging in play. So for example, a lot of my fear of loneliness comes from self. It comes from my disengagement with those around me. A lot of it's unconscious, but it's important to add that working on our parts doesn't just involve inner work. It involves working on how we interact with the tribe too. And so I just wanted to add that on at the end here. A good part of parts work is listening to the parts of us that are desiring that tribe connection, that play, and respecting them. My little inner child exile of play, SEFE, it matures when I see it, I hear it, I consider it. I don't just throw it off to the side and act like it's not important. And as I've taken the time to listen to that inner child voice, it's grown up, it's matured, and it's not causing as much turbulence with the other functions, so they don't feel as much of a need to protect. My managers, they're already pretty balanced, but the sleep part, which is, tends to be more aggressive, is able to calm down, and they start working more together. I plan to elaborate more on this in future videos, but I hope this video was helpful in considering your inner world and how these different parts make up the whole of who you are. Again, I recommend the book No Bad Parts as a starting point for doing any of these practices. If you have any questions or need any clarification, please comment below and I'm happy to clarify. We'll see you all next time.